Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for your patience and kind of our late start. We had a little bit of a longer recording last, the previous one. So welcome back. If you missed that session yesterday, you can still watch that recording on demand. We're excited to have you join us for this discussion on changing clinical requirements. Not sure if that's what.
It really isn't.
Yeah, oh, okay. Let's get into a few housekeeping items, then we'll get into what the topic really is. Those few quick housekeeping items are the fact that this session is being recorded. You will be able to access that recording and any slides that are shared on the Virtual Summit website after this event. If you want proof of your attendance as professional development, you can request an attendance certificate through the Greenlight Guru Academy. You'll find, should be able to find instructions on our Virtual Summit website or the follow-up email that we'll be sending soon. Lastly, this session should go for about 45 minutes. Fingers crossed, that's our goal. I will keep an eye on the clock today. If any questions come up throughout the presentation, I'll have the chat and the Q&A part open, so definitely put those in if you have any questions for any of our panelists. And yeah, love to hear your questions from the audience. Okay, what are we talking about today? Regulatory and product development departments, a lot of times they're separate. They're a little bit different from each other, and they need to do more than cooperate. They actually need to be working hand in hand. So we put this counseling course together to help you and your team produce more synergistic results. So let's start off with some introductions from everyone. Let's, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe your background and your current company and your role. And I'm going to start to the left of myself with Carolyn first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. So my name is Carolyn Guthrie. I work with Capstone Medical. We are a consulting company and, funny enough, cover product development and regulatory, as well as many other aspects of medical device, pre-market and post-market. Myself, I'm from South Africa. I have a background in the sciences, so it was really more, not engineering, just sciences, cellular biology. And I moved to the States. I've been here in the medical device industry for about 20 years now, and actually went back to school to really get the theory behind a lot of regulatory affairs, so on med device and pharmaceuticals. And yeah, here I am, worked in quite a few different types of technologies, IVDs, orthopedics, wound management devices, software is obviously becoming a big thing. So yeah, that's me.
Great, glad to have you, Carolyn. Carrie, you're next on my screen. You want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. I'm Carrie Britton-Hedrick. I apologize for my voice. I have some allergies today, so it may be a bit challenging. Or however, I was trained as a dentist, did that for about 8 years and decided to get out of the mouth, so to speak. Then started training docs on how to place endosseous implants, temporomandibular implants, and bone grafting, but getting thrown in the PMA space. And then I started working on SBIR grants, and then I worked for Emergo for years, and so I got into the rest of the body in the consulting role. And then I work right now for Sterling Medical Devices. I am their Director of Regulatory and Clinical Affairs. We are a design and development, started out as a software firm, but now we do everything from human factors, regulatory, product development, software development, from nuts to bolts, all the way through post-market surveillance, getting you through the FDA process and EU regulatory process. So have product scope of all parts of the body at this point. So.
Okay, great. Glad to have you on the panel today. Dylan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Etienne. My name is Dylan Horvath. I'm the founder and president of Cortex Design. We're a product design and development firm in Toronto, Canada. And I am acting as the chief product officer within Cortex now too, which to me means that I'm responsible ultimately for the success of the products that leave the design house. Founded Cortex in 1999. I've been doing this for a long time, and we approach product design from a human perspective. So we really start with the why this product exists, and we work with early stage companies or skunk work organizations within larger companies that have identified a technology that they want to commercialize, and they believe they've found a market that fits it. And so we provide that human fit and commercialization within a regulated framework. And very excited to be speaking with the other panelists here today.
Yeah, awesome. Glad to have you, Dylan. Justin, you're next on my list. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon or morning. My name is Justin Matchett. I am the Quality and Regulatory Representative at HSD. I've been in the medical device industry for about 15 years, and my background is in mechanical engineering. That's what I went to school for, but I did not go into the engineering field. I started off as a quality engineer for a medical device reprocessor. So that's where I started in medical device manufacturing, and I've been in medical device manufacturing pretty much ever since.
Okay, great. So we have a good mixture of product development and quality. So I think that's really good for this, especially for this topic, especially for those of you who've worked in both sides. I'm curious, what is your experience with the relationship between regulatory and product development teams? Any specific stories you can share, whether good or bad? I'm curious what your experiences are. And Justin, maybe I'll just start with you.
Sure. So my experience, unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, it has its ups and downs. For me, it's always been positive. And I don't know if that's because of my background in engineering that has helped me be successful with product development, but sometimes it can be very challenging, especially when you're working on a big project and the design transfer doesn't go as well as it should, because engineering isn't looking at the regulatory aspects of it. They're not looking at the quality aspects of it. They're looking at it from their perspective and their development. So that could present challenges in it. But from my experience, it's always been positive, and I think that's because of my background.
That's great. Carrie, what are your thoughts?
I've been involved from small companies to extremely large companies, so I've kind of seen the whole gamut. It's interesting if you don't get regulatory involved at the very beginning of the project and you kind of wait to the end, and they kind of forget that, oh, we do need to involve regulatory probably sooner than later, and it ends up costing companies a lot more money because you do have to meet a bunch of the regulatory requirements with respect to like medical electrical testing or biocompatibility. And at the end of the day, even though it may cost more for companies to engage earlier with regulatory, it always ends up doing it right the first time. Is kind of my motto. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
regulatory up front and kind of sprinkled along the way throughout your design and development. I recommend it highly to companies.
Okay. And yeah, Dylan, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, and Carrie, I think that's a good way of describing it, sort of sprinkling it in. I think it has to be part of culture.
Yeah.
And a common thing that I've seen is this idea that regulatory is somehow compartmentalized or like a box to check, right? So if you are doing medical device development, you've got your regulatory manager who is just going to take care of all of that for the engineers. And that I find is a really unsuccessful attitude. What regulatory should be within the development process is inherent in each of those steps. And knowing when to magnify it and when it can be a little bit looser before design controls have to come in, for example, has to be understood by the engineers, has to be understood by the industrial designers, has to be understood by the marketing and sales people within the organization, and can't be compartmentalized. You can have your subject matter experts who can help the teams, but ultimately it's got to be part of the quality management system of the company that's developing the work. Okay,
and Carolyn, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are as well. Yeah.
Sure. So, okay, coming last, I'm, at a disadvantage here, although many who know me know I like to talk, so we're fine. So none of us on this panel have actually really spoken about what we're going to talk about today, but Carrie said something, Justin said something, Dylan said something, all things that, yeah, I was going to say. And those things are early on culture, and culture is a big one for me, Dylan, and subject matter experts. So I think, you know, my experience is very similar to everyone on this panel. Is I've seen a range. You know, we know what there is and we know what we should do to make it successful. So I think, yeah, just to reiterate, having us early on, and by us, I mean regulatory and quality for that matter, regulatory and quality early on is to everyone's advantage. Having the culture where it's accepted and you invite us in is to your advantage. And then knowing who your subject matter experts are for that specific type of topic is a really important part to have on your core team.
So I want to ask the next question to you, Carolyn, to start, since you did go last time. You mentioned that the culture and the actual, if we talk about, you know, how they should work together, I think most of us would agree 100% they should work together early and often. The question, I guess, in my experience is, how do you build that culture and how do you make that happen? I'll give you an example. So when I was in product development, I can remember we'd be fighting over a problem, not fighting, just working very diligently to try to solve a problem. And we might think, should we go to regulatory? They're going to make it more complicated. You know, how do you overcome that? And what is that? How do you build that culture?
Yeah, so it's definitely from both sides, actually, in fact, the whole company. And something that someone said to me last week when, you know, we were discussing a potential new project, they said, we like your input because you also understand the business side of things. So it's really understanding what you're trying to achieve as a company and how you're wanting to achieve it. And then also hiring the right people. I have experienced, from a regulatory side, I've experienced regulatory personnel who are so to the book that there's no advantage, but it's just the way the company has grown. Or it'll be a one-person company where, you know, your expertise are what they're relying on and help us get there as cheaply and as quickly as possible. You know, they have investors they need to answer to. So I think it's really, for me, getting the right people in place and driving the right culture. That regulatory isn't we're not policing you, we're actually assisting. We're a support group, we're not the police.
Yeah. I don't want to necessarily just call on the next one. Who does anyone have a follow-up for that?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, there's when we're talking about embedding it in culture and adding the right people to your team, there's different relationships that regulatory can then or regulatory staff or agencies can play in the development process. It can be external. It can be a third party to a design group. It can be integrated within the design firm, or it can be controlled by the client in our case. So, you know, we always work for clients on developing new products. So there's another team that's coming in, and we're often sort of working in almost like a startup mode. So what's difficult is when an external third party is treating regulatory like a cap, or, you know, a framework that can't be that must be conformed to and has very rigid documentation controls. On the flip side, if your QMS is designed around the process of development and what needs to come into an ISO 13485 QMS is part and parcel of the development process, and that's just understood and part of the blueprints for your workflows, then it's the natural activity that you do as product development is compliant. So, you know, I think it's really important that you have it within a team framework as opposed to you know, an overlord.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
you have to remember, you know, that there's the requirement that we aren't the bad guys telling you you have to meet these. You know, there's ISO or electrical safety standards that tell you must do. So you have to do those. Those aren't us coming in at the end of the day saying you must comply with these. Those are safety standards that, you know, devices must meet. And, you know, if you know those up front and you build, you know, device by design, safety by design, you know, you can't build it into the device at the end of the day in your IFU. They've eliminated all that, you know. So if you know it up front and you decide to design it into your device, you're designing a safe and effective, or safe and efficacious device, you know, which is, you know, FDA and every regulatory body's goal at the end of the day, and ours too, hopefully. So, you know, you don't want to view regulatory as your nemesis. You want to view them as your friend, you know, and engage with them early, engage with them throughout the process. Don't be afraid to ask questions. A lot of, you know, as a consultancy, you know, a lot of companies have their own regulatory agencies, or internal or external. Don't be afraid to engage. If you are engaging with an external engineering firm or design firm, to engage their internal regulatory. They may know stuff too. You know, it's all a network of, you know, it's a small net, and we all may know tricks of the trade, or we may have been there or designed devices similar to it, and may have been through the FDA process more recently with the same similar design, and may give you some tips of the trade of the last reviewer we went through. Every reviewer has their own rabbit hole they go down as well. So, you know.
Yeah, and Justin, you said it's always been kind of a positive experience for you, which is awesome to hear. I'm curious if there are any consistent cultural things that you've experienced that lends itself towards that.
So it's kind of funny that I think everyone's mentioned culture, and it really does come down to culture. I've seen aspects of where it's been negative too, where if you have such a rigid system where you aren't involving quality, you go down this path to where everyone then starts to circumvent that process, which becomes toxic, which also becomes counterproductive, especially when you're at that transfer stage from development to production. I've seen instances where people have shut down product lines, and you're trying to get to your delivery for CE mark so you can deliver your product into the European market, and it becomes counterproductive. But when you have that right culture and you have that relationship built with your development team, your quality team, your production team, you can get a lot done by having just productive talks, sitting down, understanding where everyone strengths and weaknesses are, and exploiting that culture from your team. You can get a lot more done that way, and I think that's really important. But there's always the flip side of that too. If you don't have the right team in place, you can miss your mark, and you have this product that your marketing team's already released to talk. You're at trade shows talking about it, but then if you don't understand that regulatory requirement for what's needed for CE mark, then you're going to miss your deliveries. You're going to miss delivering into that European market. But so it's very interesting.
Early in my career, I got to sit, my cubicle was across the aisle from regulatory affairs specialists. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but something Carolyn said made me think of this. I was taught that they can be a police or they can be a partner. You should treat regulatory as a partner. I almost look at them as, we're all in the woods. We engineers are hacking our way through this jungle, and regulatory is up there at the top of the tree saying, we need to go this way. They're your offensive line, and really appreciate that about them. But
I think you want regulatory to be curious and engaged in the development process, and to be integrated with the designers and the engineers, and ask a lot of questions. Everyone should be asking a lot of questions, and learning and starting from, okay, this is my position within the company, rather than shut people down. I'm going to try to understand what it is that they're trying to do and use my skills and experience to amplify what they're doing. That's yes, and it's a similar rule for brainstorming. You want to your experience may automatically in your brain shut down someone's idea. It's like, oh, they don't know that. Of course, they can't do it that way, but they have a nugget there, and like those early ideas and those early conversations are precious little things that are easy to kill, but they may have merit. So I like to see regulatory act as an amplifier and a shaper. And, you know, constraints are good. Like in a choice of millions of directions to choose, regulatory is really helpful in narrowing what's possible.
What you find with engineering is they're trained and they like to work in their silo, right? So we have electrical engineers, we have software, we have mechanical, you know, so they're all in their own little silos and they like to work in that. They don't like to go outside their box. So it's very hard to let them see what's happening in everybody else's little playground or sandbox. So you need somebody out there to be a good ref and quarterback to get them all to merge and play at the end of the day. So, you know, there's this huge push with all the regulatory agencies with human factors and stuff, and look at everything put together at the end of the day. You all have your risks in each of your little silos, but now we need to see what the overall risk is when we put all of these together and put the device for human factors and risks and clinicals and everything at the end of the day, put our whole package together and see what it looks like. So we have the top and the bottom, and that's where regulatory and clinicals all sprinkled up in at the bottom. So
And then
play with
yeah.
Go ahead,
I want
Carolyn.
to just touch on one more thing before we move on, is something that actually Dylan started mentioning about sort of ISO 3485 and things like that. And so going back to the original question is, what is the norm when it comes to development and regulatory teams? And, you know, a lot of people don't like working within a quality management system, but it's really the quality management system of a company that's driving how you actually do something or who's going to get involved. So quality management systems can develop after audits or inspections or, you know, issues, and just go in a completely wrong direction. So it's a good thing to always be improving and looking at your quality system, is make it work so that your team is doing the right thing, so compliant, but doing what works for your company and what works for your culture. So just wanted to add that last part in.
Don't paint yourself in a corner. Do not write 5,000 things. I've had companies where, well, you on page 47 of your design and development didn't do 47D and get a 43 or a warning letter because you didn't follow your own procedures. Not that you didn't follow the FDA QSRs or 1345, you didn't follow your own procedures, so you got a warning letter. So if you are writing these volumes, you know, you're painting yourself in your own corner. So write your procedures to follow the regulations. Don't write them to follow engineer B's way he wants to do it and then not follow your own procedures. So
I love that comment too about the design and development plan, because in my experience, the product development may have owned that design and development plan, but to your point, exactly, quality and regulatory have to be involved in that. Do you have any practical tips or strategies that people can take and apply to their company and actually making that happen, making sure that regulatory is always involved in some of those different things?
So actually something that we do at Capstone, which has helped even just internally help understand who's coming in where, is more on a, not just design and development, but more on a project plan basis. All of the steps involved, we actually identify what department. So it's like almost a matrix, is going through, let's say, a phase one where it could still just be concept, or we're into really the development where design controls have been initiated. We're identifying, okay, for initial risk, we need to have this, and this person, and externally, someone from a company with the clinical experience. So we're actually really delineating is who needs to be involved in what process. And it has helped us to, develop these larger schedules or Gantt charts to make sure that people know when they're needed, and then there's no question.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say like integrating, getting the team to understand that like the QMS isn't this set of paperwork. The QMS is the way you do your work, and if the workflows are designed and shown. Sorry, there's a really loud cicada outside my window. I don't know if you guys can hear it. Okay, good. So we try to document what those steps and procedures are, and when there's a regulatory requirement that's part of the process. we put that right into our workflows that we use to build project plans out. And when we're following our project management software, all of that stuff is there already, right at the quoting stage. And always something that can be improved. And you have to find the right balance of over specifying. Carrie, to your point, like if you just put in so many requirements that it's very difficult for an engineer or designer to follow, there's going to be resistance. So finding that right balance in the process to make it easy to follow, but keeping flexibility so that for different types of projects and different types of clients, the workflow is common, and looking for opportunities for improving. Not thinking of your QMS processes as something that are so rigid that they can't be improved.
Well, you need to continually be looking at that plan. So every phase, you go back to your plan. Is it something need to be revised, and revise it as you're going? It's a record. Your project progresses as you're developing it. So your plan of engagement may change, update it.
And change is good. Change can be good.
Change is good.
Yeah, as long as it's well communicated.
Correct.
We do have a few questions from the audience. One is more of a comment from Shervin. They said, I think it'd be fair to say that regulatory affairs are a table stakes function. In order to play in the medical device poker game, you have to have regulatory involved. Can't develop a market strategy without understanding what the requirements are. I think that's a really good point. Moving on to one of the questions for, I think, Chirag, if I'm pronouncing that right. What is the best way to keep tabs on the applicable standards and the revisions for a particular device? Who should ideally be in charge of maintaining this? I immediately thought of quality and the QMS, but maybe those standards that, external standards, regulatory versus product development, since product development has to implement them. What are your thoughts? Carolyn, I see you smiling. So,
and actually I was thinking about this, and whoever does it in your company, it's how it works for you in terms of maintaining, the current standard and understanding the differences and how it applies to whatever product you have on the market already. That's one thing. And I think whether it's regulatory or quality, I'm not going to say either one has to do it. But I think it's understanding. There's a big new focus topic, discussion point of regulatory intelligence. And I think we're starting to see the importance of staying up to date. So, that's what I do once a month. I spend a day just researching and understanding differences. So it's not even standards, it's guidance documents, current ways of thinking. What are the FDA thinking for a certain topic? Cybersecurity is an important one. That just blew up the world. Not really, but that just blew up in terms of how do we manage it now? And especially submissions that are kind of just about to be submitted. What are we supposed to be following for those for cybersecurity? I was at a conference where someone was talking, and I really liked understanding what they said. They said it may be a draft guidance document, but the FDA is going to get that information from you one way or another. It's going to be in your AI request. They're going to get it from you. So even draft guidance documents, follow them. Another great one that I'm working with right now are the new safety and performance pathways. Understanding what the FDA is doing for you by providing these special controls or pathways. So yeah, regulatory, I think, needs to understand part of it. Quality needs to understand part of it, and whoever does which part, again, not my company. But yeah, I hope that answers the question, and I completely lost where I was going. So
okay, no, that's great.
I also believe that the engineer is responsible for doing that part of the development. Is also their responsibility. I believe it's everybody's responsibility, depending on what they're doing for that project. If you're in charge of doing electrical safety, it's your onus to do the electrical safety portion and make sure you're staying on top of the standards. If you're doing biocompatibility, it's your job to do the biocompatibility portion of it. I think it's everybody's responsibility depending on what portion of the project you're responsible for. Regulatory can have ownership. I get that, or whoever's responsible within your company, but I believe that if you have a portion of the project, you need to own it. And I think everybody, that's part of the concept of ISO 13485, you know, responsibilities and ownership, right? So.
Yeah, and that applies to post-market surveillance too. Just a little bye there.
Exactly.
Everyone has an input into post-market surveillance.
Exactly. It's not going away. The EU MDR, I don't know if anybody has had to update any of their CERs lately, but I've gone through a couple of MDR reviews.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in my background, so I was a product development. I became a project manager for a drug delivery combo device, and so I didn't understand Part 210, Part 211, ICH 9. The regulatory person, I relied heavily on that person. Or Dr. Johns, but I was in her office probably every day, every other day, talking about, you know, how do we accomplish this, that, or the other. One of the comments from the Q&A is from Mitch. He liked it when Carrie talked about regulatory and how you can be a partner and collaborator. He liked it when Dylan used the word amplify to describe the role that regulatory can play. Can you give us any actual real world examples where that is the case? And I haven't heard enough from Justin yet, so I'm going to have Justin start if that's okay. Do you have any real world examples where this can happen?
Let me think just a second. But I mean, the last product development that I worked on was a system that was used for qualifying the linear accelerators used for cancer treatments. And this system had 4 subparts. And if you combined all those parts together, there was about 1,000 components that went in to make this system. And of those, probably 65% of it was custom. They were built by a subcontractor. The rest of it was off-the-shelf components like screws, washers, wires, stuff like that. But as we got closer and closer to transferring that to manufacturing, and our goal was to build 5 first article units. They were just proof of concept. It wasn't really anything that we still had a lot of inspection to do. We still had a lot of process to develop. We had to vet out the bombs. There was a lot of work to be done. But as we built first article number 2, or proof of concept number 2, regulatory came in and said, hey, we need these to be clinically ready, which meant that we had to do a lot more work. So that disconnect where regulatory was not a partner or collaborator, we totally missed that mark. And now we had to combine 5 weeks worth of work into 2 weeks to make sure that we met our deadlines, to make sure. So that fact that we didn't work with regulatory, or that we didn't collaborate with regulatory, really was a burden on all of us that were working on it. So that's kind of like an example of where it went wrong, right? But early on, when I was working with engineering, I started reviewing these prints because no one had looked at the prints. We hadn't started first articles yet. So I went back to engineering and I said, hey, you know, engineering manager, why do you have this basic dimension here with no profile tolerances or no? So he went and said, well, I'm trying to avoid non-conforming material request, and I don't want to review all these. It's like, well, that doesn't serve our purpose, because I can't inspect it because you're missing geometric features that make it hard for. So that was an instance where we were able to collaborate early on and mitigate a potential miss. So it's important that we understand where everything fits and how to involve those people and develop that culture of working together and not being afraid of, okay, engineering had to go do more work, yes, but we also had to work together, and I gave them feedback of, okay, this is what this print is missing, this is what this needs. And it was an easy rectification of that, but we also, it was time, it was a lot of time, but it could have been a huge miss and for the company if we hadn't hit those targets.
So really having curiosity on both sides, regulatory curious about what engineering is doing, engineering curious about how that impacts regulatory, honestly.
Yeah, and it goes down to communication. You got to have those open lines of communication. You can't be afraid to talk to one another about, okay, like for CE mark, what are the requirements? Talking to regulatory early on, because like I mentioned, those first articles, we were just building proof of concept. That wasn't even like supposed to be or clinically ready. Go to a customer to try out, to use. When regulatory said, hey, this is what we need, this is what we need for CE mark, that changed our whole game plan. So we had to get all the cross-functional team members in line, sitting in a meeting, hashing out the requirements, going through everything. So it's a big part of collaboration is just biting that bullet and just sitting down and figuring out what needs to be done and understanding what the organization's goals are at the end and what you want to achieve. And I think Dylan talked a lot about that.
Yeah. Any other real world stories that any of you want to share?
Well, just reiterating from our own experience, having a project where it's very clear what the expectations are is always really difficult. Because clarity starts to come in, but clarity comes in different forms in different people's heads, right? So if you don't have if you don't have that documented, you can't have it documented at the beginning of a project because you don't necessarily know what you're even building. You know what some of the high level goals are and what the market opportunity is, but the method to get there as you start to do development, different team members, or the client may have one idea and we as developers have a different idea, and trying to find the right time to bring those ideas together, or even detect when there's a difference, and then go back and say, hey, have we even discussed this? Like, if you're doing a proof of concept, there can be infinite ways to get there, and I find that's the most challenging thing, is setting the right cadence of communication, knowing the right channels to communicate on, especially when there isn't sort of a master record that's been developed yet of what the design controls are, so that when you look like you're going to ask a question there at the end.
Oh no, go ahead and finish your thought.
It looked like it, and allowing those sort of innovative ideas to thrive so that they can become design inputs, and listening to the reasons why people got there, and yeah, like Etienne, you made a really good point about curiosity goes both ways, right? Like, it's not just regulatory being curious and open to ideas of development. It's engineering and design being curious about how regulatory constraints can help them make decisions too.
There's something I want to bring up to you. So the title of this talk is about that relationship building. When I think about that outside the context of a medical device, I mean, when I think about a relationship, I always go back to the 5 love languages. You have, whether it's quality time versus I don't know, words of affirmation, for example. And if you have a relationship where they're just going to be talking past each other. So if you take that back into the context of regulatory, product development, quality, are there any specific ways of speaking? Because I think you, both you, Dylan, and Justin kind of talked about this, like that communication. To use a different example, like finance. Finance speaks a different language. And if you want to speak with them in a way that makes sense, you want a certain feature, finance is going to have to approve certain things, you need to talk their language. Are there any suggestions or maybe quick tips you could have in this? And it looks like Carolyn looks like you might be about to say something. No, okay.
No, I was thinking go for it, Carrie.
So I've always found a regulatory strategy up front starts the package and the product launch perfectly, because you need, whoever wants to start the project, you need to have an intended use, you need to have an indication for use, and you need to have the claims that you want this product to do. And then you need to have a regulatory pathway as to what is this, what do you need to do to develop this product. And you need to eliminate all the, depending on the client, you have these small guys that want to develop a Bugatti on a gremlin budget, right? And so you need to get out for the finance guys, say, you know, we only have this much budget, guys. We can do a phase one, you know, product phase 1, 2, 3, so we can get all the Bugatti stuff in as we get money to be able to get those in there. So if you have a clear regulatory product pathway and the different phases you can do there to get there, you have a whole design pathway. These are all the engineering, you know, these are all the engineering obstacles we need to do to get there. These are all the regulatory hurdles we need to get there. What markets do you want to go into first? Do you want to do US? Do you want to do Europe? What are the other global entries? Do you want to do the big 5 in Europe? If you have that, your finance guys are going to be a lot better. If you get into the US, you may be able to get venture angels, whatever you need to do first. If you want to go to the EU, you know, it's before it used to be easier to get into the EU first. Now all those EU guys are wanting to come to the US first. So, you know, the tides have shifted. But if you have that pathway set up front, it makes it a lot easier to talk on all levels on a business aspect and get your project launched. And then you have an outline set up for your engineers and a guideline to go. That's my response to your question.
That is so good. The indication and yeah, go ahead, Carolyn, though.
Yeah, and so on that, 100% agree with Carrie, is the earlier you get some sort of strategy, you know, whether it's some sort of initial assessment just to clarify some of those items, or it's a full strategy for where you are at that time, great. 100% agree. What I also think is helpful is a lot of the times it's an engineer or someone in the product development space who's talking to the user or the one who's wanting to develop the product, and they're hearing everything that wants to be part of this sort of development process. I like being involved in those steps too. I want to hear what the product development or engineers are actually hearing, because it helps me better communicate parts of that regulatory strategy and interpret it to create that regulatory strategy. So yeah, that helps to speak the same language if we're hearing the same thing.
And all that has to exist within a framework of market success too, right? So it's great for a product to hit all the right buttons for regulatory approval, but if we're not considering the end use, you know, Carrie, I think like when you describe it, to me that's project vision. You know, there's an overall
and it all feeds into the plan, and it all can feed into your initial design plan and feed into what you need to do to get to the next phase. So that's all within the phase 0, phase 1 design plan portion of the design project. And then as plans, it's a record, it evolves. So.
And that is what is the overarching guidance for the reason to be for this project.
Correct.
You know, are we providing a solution to a real pain point that has market acceptance or market acceptance possibility?
And what is the intended use of this device? A lot of times you get all these requirements and I'm like, that doesn't tell me how this, like for a software device, for example, great, we have this mathematical measurement of, let's say we want to take a mathematical measurement of a muscle. At the end of the day, I have all these requirements, but you're not telling me how you did that justification of an algorithm for that mathematical measurement of a muscle. So you missed the boat. That was the #1 requirement within the intended use, you know, so you're forgetting that at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned software as a medical device. We're almost out of time. We're probably technically are, so we're not going to go over. Do you have a quick suggestion? There was a comment about software as a medical device. Are there any specifics or maybe unique things with SAMD when it comes to this culture of regulatory and product development? Any quick thoughts?
You get to document every darn part of your design history file and submit it to the FDA, which the EU is following at suit and doing whatever the FDA is doing with that, because they're the gold standard at this point, in my experience. So.
Okay.
Because it's such a fast moving thing, so you get it, that's hard for software engineers to document everything, and they don't like it when regulatory says you have to document your whole design history file, and it all needs to be submitted to the agency. So depending on the classification of your software level of concern, just If it's connected to a class 2 device, if it's reading from a class 2 device, it's a moderate level of concern. There are very few minor level of concern devices. Most everything, unless it's going to be a moderate level of concern, people. So
Yeah.
just stop
Okay.
on it.
That's great. Okay, lightning round.
That's it.
Lightning round, your last, so we'll start with Carolyn, your last little piece of advice on your relationship building between these two functions. Any last parting thoughts?
Yes, don't be shy. Start the relationship early.
Love it.
Dive in deep quickly.
Awesome. Carrie?
Agreed.
Okay.
We're friends, not foes.
I love that. Dylan?
I'd say be cognizant of the personalities of the people within your organization. And, you know, there are people that speak louder than others. That does not mean they have the most valid points, and being aware of when someone needs to be held up and needs to be supported and added to a conversation because they're just not the loudest voice in the room.
Justin, the last voice in the room.
Be curious, ask questions, make sure that the right people are involved.
Okay, so good. I want to highlight one thing from the comments. So Dirk actually said, congratulations, this was a great talk. All of you provided excellent comments. 3 points he wanted to add as initiated by Carolyn. 1, culture also covers company culture and where people are coming from. Country culture, I thought that was a good point. He also mentioned listen to your customer, the intended use. Of course, Carrie covered that very well. And the third was regulatory is usually not trained at a school or university. So be patient with your developer, ask, listen, explain, the summarize, and do the documentation together with the team. Thought those were good points I wanted to highlight from our audience. We are at time. Thank you so much all of you for hanging in there with us, especially with the late start. Really appreciate all of your participation on this panel. Justin, Dylan, Carrie, and Carolyn, thank you so much. The next session will be starting shortly. Up next is a presentation about QMSR and the harmonization with 1345 with Part 820. So definitely stay tuned for that. Looking forward to that update. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.
Everyone.